Our world is shrouded in mysteries, some of which can be dangerous even if they seem mundane at first glance. This story will show how ordinary events can turn into a real nightmare for someone. It demonstrates how fragile promises made during a wedding or in the Hippocratic Oath can be. Unfortunately, for some people, these are just empty words, and betrayal of trust can ruin lives and even lead to death. In early 1998, Major Jean-Paul Zavadski, the chief flight engineer of military aircraft, returned home to France after a long mission in Gabon, Africa. Finally, he was able to see his wife Nicole and their 10-year-old daughter after months of separation. The family lived in the small town of Souzy in the Loire department, near the military base where Jean-Paul served. He had 3 weeks of rest at home ahead of him before returning to duty, but shortly after his return, Jean-Paul's health deteriorated sharply. Fatigue and cough appeared. His wife bought cold medicine on the advice of family doctor Michel Perron, who thought it was a result of acclimatization after the hot and dry African climate. However, the condition did not improve, and a month later, the major developed red eyes, vomiting and diarrhea. He was forced to take sick leave. On February 14, the symptoms worsened, and Nicole called the doctor again. Jean-Paul was prescribed tests and new medications. He wore dark glasses to hide his reddened eyes. The doctor last examined him on March 8 and concluded that the cause of the illness was overwork and stress after the military operation. In his opinion, rest and prescribed treatment should have helped Jean-Paul recover. But unfortunately, it was too late. On March 11, Nicole Zavadski informed her mother-in-law that her husband had suddenly died. Jean-Paul, the son of Polish immigrants, had dreamed of the sky since childhood and fulfilled this dream by joining the military. At 21, he met Nicole in a nightclub, and a relationship began that had already lasted 18 years. It seemed incredible that a healthy 39-year-old man, the father of a 10-year-old daughter, could fade away so quickly for no apparent reason. 2 months after returning from a mission, initially, the doctor insisted that the cause could have been stress and physical exertion in Africa, as well as Jean-Paul's intense sports training. It was concluded that the major died of overstrain, which led to a heart attack. But there were grounds to doubt that the doctor never really understood the true cause of his patient's death. The certificate stated that Jean-Paul died of natural causes. The funeral took place on March 16. The bereaved Nicole asked her husband's pilot friends to deliver his body to the ceremony in his native region of Sharon-sur-Cher. There, the coffin was met by a huge crowd of relatives, friends, and hundreds of military comrades. They were united not only by memories of Jean-Paul but also by the shock that he could die at all. Jean-Paul had always been known for his robust health and excellent physical shape. He had never had any health problems. The major successfully passed a medical examination before being sent to Gabon, and after returning home, his condition did not cause concern. Therefore, his sudden death shocked everyone who knew him. When the closest people recovered from the loss, everyone began to ask the same question: what happened to Jean-Paul? His reputation on the base was impeccable. Colleagues knew him as a reliable comrade and a true professional. The major was known for his dedication to sports, thanks to which he had an impressively muscular body. This mysterious death attracted the attention of the military leadership. They questioned the competence of Jean-Paul's doctor, Michel Perron, who was unable to establish the exact cause of death of his patient. Against the background of other details, this looked extremely suspicious. 40-year-old Dr. Perron had an impeccable reputation. He was a dedicated local doctor with over 20 years of private practice experience. He was valued as a sensitive psychologist who understood patients intuitively. However, lately, the doctor seemed preoccupied with something and was losing his grip. It turned out that Dr. Perron had become a close friend of the Zavadski family and paid special attention to them. Rumors spread around town that he regularly visited Nicole, Jean-Paul's wife, even when she was perfectly healthy. Neighbors repeatedly saw the doctor's car parked near the Zavadski house while her husband was away. Michel often arrived with flowers and gifts, which suggested an affair with Nicole. This information forced a closer look at the widow's behavior. Many noted that she behaved strangely at the funeral and after her husband's death. Nicole seemed indifferent to the tragedy. Shortly after Jean-Paul's death, she bought an expensive BMW, although the family already had a car and had no extra money for such a purchase. People noticed that Nicole did not look like a grieving widow at all. Suspicions arose that the major's death was not an accident and his wife might be involved. Rumors about Jean-Paul's mysterious death spread across the air base. Mechanics and colleagues refused to believe that he could have just died. Eventually, these rumors reached the colonel, the base commander. He also doubted the naturalness of the major's death, because he was absolutely healthy and was treated by an experienced doctor. Information about the doctor's probable affair with Madame Zavadski only deepened suspicions. The colonel decided to turn to law enforcement. On May 14, 1998, 2 months after Jean-Paul's death, he summoned the gendarmes and shared his doubts. The commander was particularly worried that an experienced doctor with over 20 years of experience, who was also the widow's lover, could not diagnose the disease. The colonel expressed serious concern about the situation and fears for the safety of his subordinates. He did not rush to call Jean-Paul's death a murder, but wanted to make sure that the mysterious ailment would not claim any more lives. The gendarmes became interested in Nicole's behavior and the conclusions of the doctor lover. It was decided to start an investigation. Although at that time there were no serious grounds for accusation, Nicole radically changed her life immediately after her husband's death. Her relationship with Dr. Michel obviously continued, but in itself was not sufficient reason to consider her a killer. However, the purchase of an expensive car by an unemployed widow suggested a financial motive. It seemed that she was spending her late husband's money on this purchase, because she actually had no funds of her own. The investigation showed that Jean-Paul had 2 insurance policies totaling over £1,000,000. Nicole received these payments immediately after the funeral and began actively spending them. She bought a car, furniture, and started a large-scale renovation of the house. An analysis of the family's financial situation revealed large debts that the widow never paid off. At the beginning of the investigation, only a small fraction of the insurance money remained, which was no longer enough to pay overdue bills. Jean-Paul was unaware of the debt because his wife handled finances. She herself did not work and managed only her husband's earnings. The accumulated debts indicated her reckless attitude towards money and hidden expenses. Probably, Jean-Paul's death would have allowed her to avoid exposure of embezzlement and fix the financial situation. Of course, these conjectures had yet to be verified during the investigation. Access to Nicole's mobile phone showed that on the night of March 10 to 11, an hour before Jean-Paul's officially recorded time of death, 3 p.m. on March 11, 1998, numerous calls took place between her and the doctor. Michel indicated natural causes of death, mentioned some disease, but did not bother to detail the diagnosis, as if deliberately hiding something. The investigators faced a choice: simply look for the causes of death with limited possibilities within the framework of an ordinary investigation, or consider this case as a murder, which would give more freedom of action. The prosecutor chose the second option, which opened the way to exhumation of the body and obtaining the necessary warrants. The problem was that due to the doctor's testimony, the forensic expert did not perform an autopsy at the time. Since Jean-Paul had been buried for over 2 months, they had to act quickly. Detectives hypothesized that death was the result of poisoning. On June 2, 1998, Jean-Paul's grave was opened. Unexpectedly, the widow herself appeared at the cemetery, allegedly to pray at her husband's grave. Her presence seemed strange, because she had not shown much grief over the loss before. However, the gendarmes continued their work. They again drew attention to Nicole's suspicious behavior. She did not cry, did not look upset. Instead, she felt sick when Jean-Paul's body was brought to the surface. This could be a sign of stress from the realization that her insidious plan might be exposed and she would be punished. Immediately after the exhumation, 40-year-old Nicole was arrested on suspicion of murder and taken from the cemetery in a police car. The detention was a preventive measure to prevent her from harming herself or warning the doctor about the danger of exposure. 40-year-old Michel was also taken into custody and brought to the gendarmerie. The interrogation of the suspects was conducted separately, while Jean-Paul's body was already on the forensic examiner's table, who immediately began the autopsy. The forensic expert needed time for a full analysis of the remains, so he personally asked to keep the suspects in custody as long as possible. The gendarmes did not rush to ask uncomfortable questions, but simply observed the detainees. Nicole seemed to not fully realize the seriousness of the situation. She verbosely described Jean-Paul's last day of life, claiming that he woke up in a good mood, had a hearty breakfast and looked better than the previous few days. According to her, the sudden death came as a complete surprise, although she did not provide a clear explanation as to why she did not find anything strange about why at the end of the day, the autopsy was completed. The expert noted the condition of the brain, which indicated that around the day of death, the major fell into a coma. This fact contradicted the widow's statements. If Jean-Paul was really in such a state, he simply could not feel well and have breakfast in the morning. Obviously, Nicole was hiding something. Her husband was in an extremely serious condition throughout the day of March 11th, and possibly even the day before. This could not have gone unnoticed by either his wife or the family doctor. Why then did they not call an ambulance and take the patient to the hospital? The prosecutor was convinced that he knew the answer. The couple wanted the military man dead. This news convinced the investigators that Jean-Paul was the victim of poisoning committed by his wife, and the doctor, possibly even directing her actions, covered up for his mistress. It remained to wait for the results of the toxicological examination, which usually takes a little more time. The tests showed that for 2 months, Jean-Paul had been receiving a fatal combination of several medications that together proved to be extremely toxic. The cough syrup that his wife gave him immediately after returning from Africa, along with other drugs prescribed by the doctor, had a devastating effect on the major's health. But this was only part of the poisons found in the victim's body. Soon the police managed to break the doctor. He agreed to tell the whole truth. His confession, which began at 10:30 p.m., lasted until 4:30 a.m. the next day. Michel started from afar, from meeting Nicole Zavadski 7 years ago, which forever changed his life. Their eyes met by chance when the doctor was visiting a patient near the couple's home. A spark flashed between them. At that time, Jean-Paul was participating in military operations and left his wife alone for a long time. The lovers began to see each other several times a week. Subsequently, Michel became the family doctor and a confidant of the Zavadski family. One night, Nicole called Michel and begged him to come. When he arrived, he found her crying on the floor. The woman said that she had been physically abused and by her husband. Such incidents, according to her, happened constantly. Nicole claimed that Jean-Paul also treated their 10-year-old daughter cruelly. Sympathizing, the doctor supported the major's wife and child in every possible way, managed to win the affection of both. The girl even drew him in her pictures, which she passed on to Nicole. Gradually, Michel grew close to his mistress's other relatives as well. He had a good relationship with Aunt Julie, who in telephone conversations confirmed the stories about Jean-Paul's cruelty. She was terribly worried about her niece's health and even life, because once in a fit of rage, her husband broke Nicole's arm. According to Julie, Jean-Paul's cruelty was not limited to isolated incidents. The situation reached such a point that Nicole called the family doctor several times a day, regardless of the time. Even if she called at 3 in the morning, she could spend hours complaining about the latest beatings and her husband's abuse of their daughter. It seemed that these conversations began to exhaust Michel. Nicole could call him 10 to 30 times a night. For a doctor who worked without days off, such calls every 10 to 15 minutes were devastating. He did not get enough sleep and looked tired. On the day of the major's death alone, Nicole made 6 outgoing calls to Michel, and he called her more than 300 times. This relationship exhausted the doctor so much that many patients barely recognized him. He was drained both physically and emotionally. Worrying about the safety of Nicole and her daughter, Michel paid almost no attention to the problems of other patients. He fell asleep on the go, completely absorbed in the drama of the Zavadski family. Over the 7 years of the extramarital affair, Nicole managed to completely convince her lover that Jean-Paul was a cruel tyrant. Michel was so enchanted by this woman that he left his own wife and 3 children for her. Now only the military man stood in the way of their happiness. Shortly before the tragedy, Nicole told Michel about her intention to file a domestic violence report and initiate a divorce. However, according to her, bureaucratic procedures greatly slowed down the case. Nicole, her aunt, and daughter wrote the doctor notes with pleas for help. Gradually, a single thought matured in Michel's head: murder. Getting used to this idea, he proposed making a lethal injection of a substance that, in combination with other components, formed the most potent poison capable of causing instant death in a large dose. But it would be too noticeable, so the conspirators decided to act more carefully. Fortunately for the poisoners, Jean-Paul developed a cough after returning from Africa. That's when they added the first drops of poison. The doctor developed a mixture that would gradually suppress the body. At a crucial moment, it was planned to make a fatal injection. This plan began to be implemented on February 11th, when after another dose of medication, Jean-Paul lost consciousness. But, according to Michel's confession, he lacked the courage to kill the major then. On February 14th, Nicole tried to poison her husband with another agent that caused vomiting, diarrhea, and reddening of the eyes. The doctor who was called made an injection allegedly to alleviate the symptoms, but in fact it contained a small dose of a lethal substance. Fortunately, this was not enough, because Jean-Paul was in good health. Then Michel prescribed pills that were supposed to cause heart problems. Due to their influence, the major did indeed experience severe pain and asked for sick leave. But he still held on and resisted the poison. The failure required improvisation from the criminals observing him. The doctor supposedly prescribed magnesium, but replaced it with two other a new deadly cocktail. However, even after that, Jean-Paul continued to live. Nicole called her lover with complaints that her husband did not want to die, and gave an ultimatum: if he did not die, she would commit suicide. On March 4th, Michel again came to the patient and gave him another powerful substance instead of magnesium, due to the influence of which the major fell into a coma within a few days. On March 11th, the doctor returned to the Zavadski house to give an injection that would make the coma irreversible. He administered the drug, took his beloved and her daughter, and took them to his home for lunch. Nicole returned around 2 p.m. and found her husband dead. She cleaned up traces of the crime, threw out all incriminating items, and called the police. Immediately after the end of this story, the doctor was charged with murder. He stated that his strong love for this woman had completely devastated him. Michel was so entangled in her lies that he stopped distinguishing between good and evil. The man burst into tears, but whether those were tears of remorse or self-pity of a caught criminal was uncertain. Only Nicole could answer this question. When the Black Widow was told about the doctor's confession to the murder, she also made a statement. The woman claimed that she knew about his intentions. According to her, out of jealousy, Michel decided to deal with her husband, but she was not aware of his plans and sincerely believed that her lover was trying to cure Jean-Paul. Nicole allegedly learned the truth about the murder only at lunch on March 11th in the doctor's house, where they came with her daughter. It was there that Michel gave her instructions on how to behave in case of arrest. She had no choice but to follow his plan. Confirm or refute this testimony, more information was needed. The investigators had to find out whether it was a murder planned by the family's lone doctor, or whether Nicole had been his accomplice for months. To search for new evidence, the gendarmes searched the new car bought by the widow after her husband's death. They found numerous messages from banks and bailiffs in it. The family's financial situation turned out to be even worse than previously assumed. Nicole was threatened with prosecution for debts, which gave her a strong motive for murder. The searches continued at the doctor's house, where drawings were found, allegedly made by the major's daughter. However, forensic experts doubted their authenticity. A graphologist and psychologist were involved in the investigation to conduct an examination. Tests with Nicole's participation proved with 100% certainty that it was she who wrote these notes, imitating her daughter's handwriting. It also turned out that all this time Michel was communicating not with Aunt Julie, who did not actually exist, but with Nicole herself, who changed her voice during telephone conversations. For years actively manipulating the doctor, Nicole completely confused him with her lies. The scale of the deception was staggering. She touched Michel with stories about the loss of her entire family due to accidents and illnesses, although in reality everyone was alive. Then she pressed on his pity with stories about beatings by her husband. At the same time, she had been deceiving Jean-Paul for a long time, in particular claiming that she worked in a nursing home. In fact, the Black Widow was unemployed and simply spent all the money earned by her husband while he was constantly on business trips. Of course, under such conditions, the family's financial situation was rapidly deteriorating. However, until the last moment, Nicole managed to hide it from Jean-Paul. But when she was threatened with a lawsuit over debts, there was a danger of exposure. So she couldn't think of anything better than to kill her husband and get the insurance payout. Analyzing the suspect's personality, psychiatrists discovered a pathological liar with complex behavior. She was a born manipulator, which she vividly demonstrated with the doctor. She managed to convince her lover that Jean-Paul was really cruel and dangerous, although all the Major's close acquaintances denied such assumptions. No one ever saw signs of beatings on Nicole's body. When communicating with the deceased's daughter, it turned out that Jean-Paul never laid a finger on either his wife or the girl. The child described her father as a kind and loving family man. All of Nicole's stories turned out to be fabrications. She never went to the police and did not try to file for divorce, despite the fact that Michel was a murderer. At the same time, he became a victim of a dangerous criminal who not only manipulated him and drove him to crime, but also enjoyed it. However, a psychiatric examination did not reveal any deviations in her, so the woman had to stand trial and answer for her actions to the fullest extent. Of unravel this tangle, it took almost 2 years of investigations, during which the accused were held in custody without the right to bail. Finally, in June 2001, the defendants found themselves before a jury. Even during the hearings, it was noticeable that Nicole continued to dominate the doctor. She was restrained and cold, insisting on her innocence and claiming that the idea of poisoning belonged exclusively to Michel. Fortunately, the criminal's version changed once again, which the prosecutor pointed out, convincingly exposing the lie. But even after that, the Black Widow continued to deceive, which only worsened her position. The doctor looked the complete opposite. Many witnesses vied with each other to praise him as a specialist and a person. However, this did not negate the fact that it was he who played a key role in the murder. After deliberation, the jury found both defendants guilty. Nicole Zavadski was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and her lover to 20 years. The woman was furious with the verdict and almost immediately decided to appeal it. Since she killed Jean-Paul together with Michel, he also faced a retrial. The new trial took place in March 2002 and lasted 4 days. As a result, Nicole's prison term was increased to 28 years, while Michel's sentence was left unchanged. Both are still behind bars. Even in prison, Nicole managed to tune most of those around her to her liking, thanks to which the criminal enjoys comprehensive support there. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.